Before we continue, please be aware that this video is based solely on publicly available information, including court documents and verified news reports. All details presented are factual and derived from credible sources. Now let's return to the discussion. It was a quiet February night in the mountains of New Hampshire. A young woman crashed her car into a snowbank. A neighbor called 911. Police were 4 minutes away, and when they arrived, she was gone. No footprints leading anywhere. No screams. No note. Just a dented car, a bottle of wine, and a darkness that has swallowed 20 years of answers. Her family never stopped searching. Investigators never stopped theorizing. And the closer you look at this case, the stranger it gets. Because Maura Murray didn't just disappear that night. She had already started disappearing before she even left campus. By the end of this video, you'll have to decide for yourself. Was Maura running towards something or running away from something far worse? Think about the last time you said goodbye to someone you loved and didn't know it was the last time. Think about the last ordinary Tuesday when someone you cared about was right in front of you, laughing, tired, stressed about something small. And then the next day, they were just gone. No warning, no explanation, no body, no answers. That is the reality that the Murray family has lived with every single morning since February 9th, 2004. And when you follow this story all the way from the beginning to the very end, when you trace every phone call, every email, every mile of road, what you find is not just a mystery. What you find is a young woman who was carrying more weight than anyone around her knew, and a system that has never, in over 2 decades, been able to explain what happened to her. My name is Maura Murray. That's what the missing persons flyer says. It shows a 21-year-old with dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile so wide it takes up half the photograph. Nursing student, star athlete, daughter, sister. She was the kind of person her older brother, Fred Jr., described with one sentence that has stayed with everyone who ever heard it. Maura was talented in everything she did. Be it schoolwork, she got straight A's. Be it athletics, top-notch in everything she ever did. And yet somehow, on a freezing night in rural New Hampshire, that young woman stepped out of her crashed car, and the world simply never saw her again. Not one confirmed sighting, not one piece of physical evidence recovered, not one answer in 20 years, 4 months and counting. Before we go any further into this story, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching this from. This community stretches across every time zone, and we genuinely love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like Maura's deserve to be told, retold, and never forgotten. And we make sure of that every single week. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened on that dark road in New Hampshire, you first need to understand who Maura Murray was and what the 4 days before her disappearance looked like from the inside. Maura Ann Murray was born on May 4th, 1982, in Brockton, Massachusetts. The fourth of 5 children born to Frederick Murray, a medical technician, and Lori Murray, a nurse. The family eventually settled in Hanson, a small, quiet town on the south shore of Massachusetts. The kind of town where you know your neighbors, where Friday nights mean high school football games, and where ambition is measured not by what your zip code tells you, but by what you're willing to work for. And from her earliest years, Maura was willing to work for everything. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and while that kind of disruption can leave lasting marks on a child, if those who knew Maura as a girl described her as resilient, she was the one who kept going, who stayed focused, who found her outlet not in words or in stillness, but in movement, in running. Maura Murray was, by any honest measure, an exceptional young woman. In high school at Whitman Hanson Regional, she earned a spot in the National Honor Society, finished near the top of her class academically, and became one of the most decorated runners the school had ever produced. She scored in the 95th percentile on her SAT with a near-perfect score in mathematics. She broke school records in cross-country and track. She qualified for the U.S. National Scholastic Outdoor Championships as a sophomore, finishing 33rd in the entire country in the 2-mile race. She earned Boston Globe all-scholastic honors, and her father Fred, a hardworking, a proudly devoted man who had coached his children's sports teams and taken them hiking and camping through the White Mountains of New Hampshire since they were small, was by all accounts deeply proud of every single thing his daughter achieved. When it came time for college, Maura Murray did something that many would consider extraordinary. She accepted a congressional nomination, secured through the late Senator Edward Kennedy, and enrolled at the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. She was following in the footsteps of her older sister Julie, who had attended West Point before her. At West Point, Maura continued to excel. She joined the cross-country and track teams, competed at a high level, and proved herself capable of surviving one of the most demanding academic and physical environments in the country. But somewhere in the middle of her second year, something changed. The social environment at West Point, by Maura's own admission, was not the right fit for her. The rigid structure, the pressure, the culture, it wasn't where she wanted to be, and so she made the decision to transfer. There are conflicting accounts of exactly why Maura left West Point. The official version, the one her family has stood by, is that she simply decided the military life was not for her and chose to pursue a different path. But there are also records that suggest Maura may have been involved in an incident involving stolen property from the PX store at Fort Knox during a summer training program. An incident that reportedly led to a judicial hearing, and may have made staying at West Point untenable, regardless of her personal feelings about the institution. What is not disputed is the outcome. Maura transferred to the University of Massachusetts Amherst on a full academic scholarship, enrolled in the nursing program, made the dean's list every single semester, continued competing on the track team, and by the fall of 2003, to the world at least, her future looked completely intact. But by the fall of 2003, beneath the dean's list grades and the athletic accomplishments, there were small signs that life for Maura Murray was more complicated than it appeared from the outside. In November of 2003, Maura was caught using a stolen credit card to order food from local restaurants near campus. The charge was formally continued, meaning it was set aside, with the understanding that if she stayed out of trouble for 3 months, it would be dismissed entirely. Maura was placed on a form of academic probation. The legal matter was minor by most measures, but for a young woman with her ambitions, specifically her dream of becoming a registered nurse, a fraud-related charge, even a minor one, could have posed a real obstacle to her nursing license application down the line. She knew that, and people who've studied this case closely believe that she thought about it often in the months that followed. The man at the center of Maura's emotional life was her boyfriend, Billy Rausch, an Army lieutenant she had first met at West Point in the fall of 2001. The two had stayed together through her transfer, through the distance between Amherst, Massachusetts, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where Billy was stationed. By all accounts, Billy was steady, loving, committed, but the relationship was being worn down by the miles between them and by whatever was happening inside Maura's head in the weeks and months leading up to February 2004. Her sister Kathleen would later say that Maura and Billy were having what she described as serious problems. Whether those problems were about the distance, about something that happened, or about someone else entirely, nobody has ever said for certain. What we know is that when Maura drove north on February 9th, she had not told Billy where she was going, and the last email she ever sent him was brief, quiet, and sad. Now here is where the story shifts, because in the 4 days before Maura Murray disappeared, something moved inside her. Some decision was made, or some weight became too heavy to carry. And to understand that, you have to go back to the evening of February 5th, 2004. Maura was working the night shift at her campus security job at the Melville Dormitory building at UMass Amherst. It was around 10:30 in the evening when she received a phone call from her older sister, Kathleen. The two talked for a while. Kathleen was in the middle of her own personal difficulty, having recently been discharged from a rehabilitation facility for issues related to alcohol. The conversation was hard, and at some point during that phone call, sitting at her security desk in that empty dormitory lobby, Maura Murray broke down completely. Her supervisor arrived to find her, in the supervisor's own words, just completely zoned out. No reaction at all. She was unresponsive. The supervisor escorted Maura back to her dormitory room at around 1:20 in the morning. When the supervisor asked Maura what was wrong, Maura said just 2 words, "My sister." That was it. 2 words and then silence. And for the next 13 years, the exact contents of that phone call remained unknown to the public. It was not until October of 2017 that Kathleen Murray finally spoke publicly about what had been said that night, revealing that it had been a deeply painful conversation about her struggle with addiction and the collapse of her engagement. Whether that conversation alone was enough to break something open in Maura, or whether it was the last piece of pressure added to something that had already been close to breaking, no one can say with certainty. What is certain is that after that phone call, something in Maura Murray changed, and it never fully changed back. 2 days later, on February 7, 2004, Fred Murray made the drive from Connecticut to Amherst to spend the weekend with his daughter. Fred was many things: a veteran, a father who coached his children's sports teams, a man who, by his own family's description, was deeply devoted to his kids. He and Maura spent the afternoon together, including a trip to look at cars, since Maura's own 1996 Saturn had seen better days. They went to dinner that evening with one of Maura's friends. Afterward, Maura dropped her father at his motel near campus, borrowed his car, a Toyota Corolla, and went to attend a dorm party with her friend Kate Markopoulos. It was a small gathering, nothing unusual, the kind of thing a 21-year-old college student does on a Saturday night. But what happened in the hours after that party would kick off a chain of events that would end less than 36 hours later on a dark mountain road 200 miles away. At approximately 3:30 in the morning of February 8, 2004, while driving back from the party toward her father's motel, Maura Murray struck a guardrail on Massachusetts Route 9 in Hadley. The crash caused nearly $10,000 worth of damage to her father's Toyota Corolla. A state trooper responded to the scene and filed an accident report. There is no documentation that a field sobriety test was ever conducted. Maura was shaken, cold, and clearly upset, and she was driven to her father's motel. Fred was asleep when she arrived. By some accounts, he didn't even realize she was there until he woke up later that morning. When he saw the damage to his car, Fred was not pleased. The two had words, though the full content of that conversation has never been disclosed publicly. What we know is that later that morning, Fred rented a car, drove Maura back to campus, and headed home to Connecticut. Before he left, Fred reminded Maura that she needed to pick up accident report forms from the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles so they could file the insurance claim together. They agreed to talk Monday night to go over the forms. It was, by every outward appearance, a normal parting between a father and a daughter dealing with a minor car accident. Nothing dramatic, nothing final. Fred drove away. Maura went back inside her dormitory, and somewhere in the hours that followed, perhaps that night, or perhaps in the very early hours of Monday morning, Maura Murray sat down at her computer and made a series of searches that would become some of the most analyzed digital breadcrumbs in the history of American missing persons cases. She searched MapQuest for directions to Burlington, Vermont. She searched directions to the Berkshires. She searched for information about a condo rental in Bartlett, New Hampshire. And then, in a search that investigators later found and never quite explained, she searched for information about the effects of heavy alcohol consumption on an unborn child. That last search has never been fully resolved. Investigators who were briefed on the contents of Maura's computer activity in the early hours of February 9th have confirmed it happened. But what it meant, whether it was related to a personal concern, whether it was research for a nursing class, or whether it spoke to something happening in Maura's private life, that question has never been answered. What we do know is that at 3:32 in the morning, Maura emailed a nursing assignment to her classmates, a maternity clinical definitions worksheet she had completed and needed to submit. That is the last known piece of academic work Maura Murray ever turned in. A routine nursing homework assignment sent into the quiet of the early morning hours while her dormitory slept around her. And then, a few hours later, Monday, February 9th, 2004, began, and everything accelerated. At 12:55 in the afternoon on February 9th, Maura made a 3-minute phone call to Linda Salamone, the owner of a condominium rental property in Bartlett, in New Hampshire, the same town where Maura had vacationed with her father and Billy Rausch the previous summer. Linda Salamone did not remember the call when she was later contacted by investigators, but she confirmed that she did not rent a unit to Maura that day. The condo was not available, or the arrangements simply weren't made. Whatever Maura had been hoping to set up, it didn't come together. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Maura emailed Billy Rausch a short, quiet message with the subject line, "Hey, hey." In it, she wrote that she loved him, that she had received his messages but hadn't felt like talking to much of anyone, and that she promised to call him later that day. She signed it simply, "Love you, Maura." It was the last communication she ever had with Billy Rausch. At 1:24 in the afternoon, Maura sent an email to her nursing professors informing them that she would be out for a week. She cited a death in the family as the reason. There was no death in the family. It was a lie, a deliberate, crafted lie. And it is one of the most studied and debated details in this entire case. Why lie? Why not simply say she needed a few personal days? Was she afraid of getting into trouble? Was she buying time? Was she planning to come back? Or was she writing an email she never intended to honor? At 2:05 in the afternoon, she called a toll-free tourism line for Stowe, Vermont. The call lasted less than a minute, and no reservation was ever made. At 2:18, she attempted to call Billy Rausch. He didn't answer because he was simultaneously trying to call her own number. They missed each other. And that missed call is the last time Maura ever tried to reach the man she had told she loved. At 3:15 in the afternoon, Maura Murray walked to the ATM at the Big Y Plaza in Hadley, Massachusetts, and withdrew $280 in cash, nearly the entire balance of her bank account. Surveillance footage captured her at the machine. Investigators later confirmed it was her. She was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. She looked composed. She looked ordinary. After the ATM, she drove to Liquors 44, also in Hadley. According to police records, she returned 79 empty cans and bottles, collecting $3.95 in change, and then purchased a bottle of Kahlua, a bottle of vodka, a nip of Bailey's Irish Cream, and a 12-pack of Corkscrew Wine Cellars Merlot. The total came to approximately $40. At some point that afternoon, she also picked up the accident report forms her father had reminded her about. The forms for the crash in his Toyota Corolla the night before. Those forms were later found in her Saturn after she disappeared. At approximately 3:40 in the afternoon, Maura Murray packed. And by packed, the word does not do justice to what investigators found when they searched her dormitory room. She had boxed up a significant portion of her belongings. Her room, by the account of those who saw it afterward, was nearly empty. This was not the packing of someone taking a few days away. This looked like someone who was not planning to come back, or at the very least, someone who was not sure whether she would. She loaded her Saturn, the alcohol, the clothes, her books, personal items, and she drove away from campus. Within 10 minutes of leaving, she made her last recorded ATM withdrawal. She never called anyone to say goodbye. She did not call Kathleen. She did not call Julie. She did not call her mother, Lori. She did not call Fred. She got in her car and drove north, straight toward the White Mountains. At 4:37 in the afternoon, Maura made what investigators confirmed was her last recorded phone call. To her own voicemail box, a 4-minute call during which she listened to messages that had been left for her. We do not know who left those messages. We do not know what they said. We do not know whether what she heard on that voicemail changed anything, whether it confirmed something she had already decided or unsettled something she had almost resolved. All we know is that at 4:37 in the afternoon, on February 9th, 2004, Maura Murray listened to her voicemail for 4 minutes, and then she turned her phone off, or it went to silent, or the signal dropped as she moved further north into territory where the cellular towers grew sparse. And from that moment forward, there is no record of any outgoing communication from Maura Murray. She simply drives north, into the dark. The drive from Amherst, Massachusetts, to the stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, where Maura's car was found, takes roughly 2 hours under normal conditions. On the night of February 9th, the roads were passable but cold, a typical New England February evening, the kind that settles in hard and fast once the sun drops behind the mountains. Route 112, which locals know as Wild Amonosuk Road, runs through one of the most isolated corridors in New England. It is a narrow 2-lane road that snakes through dense forests and along frozen riverbanks, connecting the small communities of the White Mountain region. There are stretches of Route 112 where you can drive for miles without passing another car, without seeing a house light, without encountering another human being. It is beautiful country in the daylight. In the dark in February, it is something else entirely. It is the kind of road that makes you feel very alone. At approximately 7:27 in the evening, a resident named Faith Westerman, who lived in a house near the sharp curve at the intersection of Route 112 and Wild Amonosuk Road in Woodsville, a small community within the town of Haverhill, heard a loud noise outside her home. When she looked out her window, she saw a car resting in a ditch against a snowbank, having clearly failed to negotiate the turn. She called the Grafton County Sheriff's Office to report the accident. In her call, Faith Westman described seeing what appeared to be a glowing red light inside the car, possibly the reflection of a cell phone. Her husband, who also witnessed the scene, would later say that he believed he saw a red glow rather than a cigarette being smoked, contradicting an early description that briefly appeared in reports. Either way, someone was inside that car when Faith Westman first looked out her window, and within minutes that someone would be gone. At almost the same moment that Faith Westman made her call, Butch Atwood, a local school bus driver, was driving home along Route 112 after completing his route. He came upon the scene, a dark-colored Saturn wedged against the snowbank, while airbags deployed, driver's side clearly impacted. He pulled over. He was a neighbor. He was a decent man doing what a decent man does on a dark road when he sees someone in trouble. He stopped and approached. The young woman in the car appeared shaken but physically uninjured. He asked her if she was okay. She said she was just shook up. He offered to call the police for her, and in response, clearly, calmly, she told him, "No, please don't. I already called AAA." Butch Atwood took her at her word. He told her he lived just down the road if she needed anything, and he drove home. The moment he pulled into his driveway, he called 911 anyway. The time of that call was 7:42 in the evening. Here is where the timeline becomes critical, because Butch Atwood's 911 call at 7:42 p.m. is one of the most studied timestamps in this entire case. According to the dispatch log, Officer Cecil Smith of the North Haverhill Police Department was sent to the scene at 7:29 p.m., 2 minutes after Faith Westman's initial call. Based on Officer Smith's own described route in a 2017 interview, the drive to the crash site would have taken him between 15 and 18 minutes, placing his arrival at approximately 7:45 or 7:46 in the evening. When Smith arrived, Maura's Saturn was there. The doors were locked. Her belongings were inside. A rag had been stuffed into the tailpipe, a detail her father Fred later explained was something he had shown Maura to do to prevent the car from being ticketed for excessive exhaust smoke from an old engine. There was an open bottle of wine, and there was no Maura. She was simply gone. But this is where something truly chilling enters the picture. A detail that most casual observers of this case do not know, but that serious investigators have spent years trying to explain. At least one witness reported seeing a police SUV parked nose to nose with Maura's dark sedan somewhere between 7:33 and 7:37 in the evening, a full 10 minutes or more before Officer Smith's documented arrival at the scene. If that timeline is accurate, then a vehicle was already at Maura's car before any official responder arrived. The identity of the driver of that vehicle, whether it was an off-duty officer, a civilian vehicle that looked like a police SUV, or someone else entirely, has never been definitively established. That detail has never been resolved, and it has haunted investigators and researchers for 20 years, because it means that in the critical window between the crash and the official police response, someone else was there. Someone we cannot name, someone who has never come forward. The search dogs arrived that night. They were brought in quickly once it became clear that Maura was not in the car. Not in the immediate vicinity, not in the ditch, not in the trees directly alongside the road. The dogs did their work. They picked up a scent, and what they found has been consistently underreported in most tellings of the story because the scent trail did not lead into the forest. It did not lead down a ravine or toward the frozen river. According to the accounts of those present that night, the dogs tracked Maura's scent along the road, eastward in the direction of the nearest town. She was not running into the wilderness. If the dogs were right, she was moving toward something. Toward the lights of Woodsville, perhaps, or toward a vehicle she had arranged to meet, or toward a stranger who stopped on a dark road and offered something that, in the cold and confusion of that night, must have seemed like help. New Hampshire State Police and local law enforcement searched through the night and into the morning. Volunteers joined the effort over the following days. Helicopters flew the terrain. K-9 teams worked the ridgelines and the frozen banks of the Wildamanausuk River. Divers entered the frigid water. The White Mountain terrain is extraordinarily unforgiving, steep, densely wooded, laced with ravines and gullies that fill with snow and shadow even in daylight. This is country where things disappear. Hikers have gone missing in these mountains and never been found. It is not country that gives up its secrets easily, but even accounting for the terrain, even accounting for the weather, the search that followed Maura Murray's disappearance found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace of the young woman who had been standing on that road, shivering and shaken, less than an hour before. She was gone so completely it bordered on the impossible. Fred Murray received the call about his daughter and drove to New Hampshire immediately. He arrived in Haverhill and was met by investigators who, at that point, still had very little to tell him. He checked into a motel near the crash site, the same strip of small-town New Hampshire road where his daughter had vanished. And for the next several weeks, Fred Murray did not go home. He walked those roads, he knocked on doors, he talked to anyone who would talk to him. He organized additional searches, he hired people, he pushed law enforcement. And when the official search wound down in early March, when the state police began treating the case as a missing persons matter rather than an active emergency, Fred Murray kept coming back every single weekend, driving up from Massachusetts, walking those mountain roads, calling her name into the trees, looking for any sign, any fragment of the daughter who had driven into these mountains and simply ceased to exist. As investigators began reconstructing the 48 hours before the crash, the picture that emerged was layered and deeply difficult to interpret. Where in the email to the professors, the false claim of a family death pointed to someone trying to buy time or someone who did not want to be found. The searches on her computer for vacation destinations pointed to someone planning something. But what, and for how long, and with whom, remained unclear. The credit card fraud case hanging over her future, the missed connections with Billy Rausch, The dorm room packed up like someone who wasn't planning to return. The cash withdrawn to almost zero. These details, taken together, formed a portrait of someone standing at the edge of something, some decision, some breaking point. But what that decision was, and whether it was fully her own, and whether she ever got to carry it through, that is the question that has never been answered. One of the first major theories that investigators and the public latched onto in the early days was that Maura Murray had disappeared voluntarily, that she had planned to start over, to leave her life behind, and that the car crash on Route 112 had been either an unplanned accident along the way, or in some versions of the theory, a staged event designed to throw off anyone who came looking. The circumstantial case for this theory is not nothing. She had packed most of her belongings. She had nearly emptied her bank account. She had researched destinations. She had told no one where she was going. She had lied to her professors. These are not the actions of someone who planned to return to her Tuesday morning nursing lecture. And journalist James Renner, who wrote the nonfiction book True Crime Addict and has studied this case more deeply than almost anyone outside the Murray family, spent years investigating the possibility that Maura left willingly, perhaps fleeing the credit card case, perhaps fleeing something personal, perhaps simply desperate for a different life. But Fred Murray from the very beginning rejected this theory, completely and without reservation. He believed, and said publicly in interview after interview over 20 years, that his daughter was abducted on the night of February 9, 2004. Not that she wandered into the woods, not that she climbed into a friend's car, but that someone on that road in those critical minutes between the crash and the arrival of police took her. Private investigator Lou Berry, a former police chief from Granby, Massachusetts, whom the Murray family later hired to conduct an independent investigation, reached a similar conclusion. After carefully reconstructing the timeline and reviewing what evidence was available, Berry told reporters, "The probability is that she was abducted, not necessarily against her will initially." That final phrase, "not necessarily against her will initially," is one of the most haunting lines ever uttered in the context of this case, because it raises the darkest possibility of all. Route 112 in Woodsville, New Hampshire, on a February night, is the kind of road where a young woman standing beside a broken-down car is completely vulnerable. There are no surveillance cameras on that stretch of road. There are very few houses. The nearest town is small and quiet by 7:30 in the evening. If a vehicle had stopped, if a driver had pulled over in those minutes between Butch Atwood leaving and Officer Cecil Smith arriving, there would have been no witnesses unless someone happened to be looking out their window at exactly the right moment. And we know from the timeline that at least one vehicle did stop near that car before police arrived. We know from the witness report that a vehicle was parked nose to nose with Maura's Saturn between 7:33 and 7:37 in the evening. We know the identity of that driver has never been established, and we know that when Smith arrived at 7:45 or 7:46, Maura Murray was gone. Whatever happened in that window, that 13-minute window between 7:27 and 7:46, has never been explained. In the years following the disappearance, several local individuals in the Haverhill area came under varying levels of scrutiny from amateur investigators, podcasters, and the broader true crime community that had begun to form around the case. The Maura Murray case was one of the first major missing persons cases of the internet era to develop a dedicated and highly organized online investigative community. A website, mauramurray.com, became a central hub for researchers, former law enforcement officers, journalists, and ordinary people from around the world who had become convinced they could help solve what official investigators had failed to crack. By the time podcasts like Missing Maura Murray, hosted by Lance Reinstierna and Tim Polari, began releasing episodes in the mid-2000s, tens of thousands of people were actively engaged in the case, analyzing phone records, reviewing dispatch logs, cross-referencing witness statements, and in some cases, making direct contact with residents of Haverhill and the surrounding area. That level of public attention brought both benefits and costs. On the benefits side, the community pressure helped force the release of documents, including the UMass Amherst police file, which was eventually made public after years of requests. Amateur researchers uncovered discrepancies in the official timeline. They identified witness accounts that had never been fully pursued by investigators. They helped elevate the case to a level of national visibility that ensured it was never simply filed away and forgotten. But the costs were real too. Residents of Haverhill who had been near the crash site that night found themselves subjected to repeated, sometimes aggressive, contact from strangers who had decided, based on internet research, that they knew more than they did. The Murray family itself was occasionally caught in crossfire between competing theories, and supporters of different explanations sometimes attacked each other and the family online with an intensity that had nothing to do with finding Maura and everything to do with being right on the internet. Among the most significant physical developments in the case came in 2019, 15 years after the disappearance. Following a tip in the response of cadaver dogs near a property in the Haverhill area, investigators with the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit authorized a search of a home near the crash site. Ground-penetrating radar had reportedly indicated something of interest beneath the basement floor. Cadaver dogs had alerted to the property on more than one occasion. Fred Murray had visited the property himself and spoken publicly about his belief that his daughter might be there. His son Curtis, Maura's younger brother, told local reporters, "I am optimistic that we may have finally found her." The search was conducted. It was thorough. Associate Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin confirmed that investigators had gone through the property with every available resource. And then the announcement came. No evidence connecting the house to Maura Murray had been found. Nothing. The basement had given up no answers. Fred Murray's reaction to that announcement was captured by a television camera. He stood outside, jaw tight, eyes clear, and said simply, "This one hurts. Well, this one hurts a lot. And you watch that footage and you understand." This was not a man experiencing defeat for the first time. This was a man who had been defeated over and over again for 15 years. A man who had spent every available weekend driving back to those mountains, walking those roads, pushing at every door that looked like it might open. A man who had filed lawsuits against the state of New Hampshire, trying to access investigative records he believed were being withheld. A man who had watched his daughter's case become an internet phenomenon, analyzed by thousands of strangers, theorized about in dozens of books and podcasts, while the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit's official file remained open and empty of any confirmed answer. Fred Murray did not stop. He simply kept going. Because what else do you do? What do we actually know about those final minutes? Strip away the theories, strip away the podcasts and the Reddit threads and the competing narratives. What do the physical facts by themselves actually tell us? We know that Maura's car struck a snowbank on a sharp left-hand turn on Route 112 in Woodsville, New Hampshire at approximately 7:27 p.m. We know the airbags deployed, meaning the impact was significant. We know there was an open bottle of wine in the car. We know Maura had purchased alcohol earlier that afternoon. We know she told Butch Atwood she had called AAA, and we know she had not, because AAA confirmed they never received a call from her that night. We know there was no cell service in that area, making the claim impossible regardless of her intentions. We know Atwood left at approximately 7:40 or 7:41 p.m. We know he called 911 at 7:42 p.m. We know Officer Smith arrived at 7:45 or 7:46 p.m. We know that in that small window she disappeared. We know that the cadaver dogs tracked her scent east along the road, not into the forest, suggesting she moved in the direction of Woodsville rather than into the woods. We know that at least one unidentified vehicle was present at the scene between 7:33 and 7:37 p.m., positioned nose to nose with her Saturn. We know that no official record accounts for that vehicle. We know that multiple first responders arrived at the scene that night, and not one reported seeing anyone walking along the road, meaning if Maura left on foot, she did so before the search expanded and covered the area. And we know that from the moment she disappeared until today, over 20 years later, there has been no confirmed sighting of Maura Murray. No activity on her bank account, no activity on her cell phone, no body, no grave, no confession, no answer, only the absence, only the quiet, only a family and a community left sitting with the unbearable weight of not knowing. In 2021, a new high-technology search was conducted near the crash site and surrounding terrain. Investigators used advanced detection methods to sweep areas that earlier searches may have missed. The White Mountains had claimed other missing persons before: hikers, wanderers, people who stepped off the edge of the trail in bad weather and were swallowed by the terrain. Statistically, it is a place where a body could theoretically remain undiscovered for years, particularly if the person entered the river system or was covered by successive seasons of snowfall in a remote area. But the 2021 search, like every search before it, found nothing. And the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit continued to list Maura Murray as an open case. Actively investigating, they said, though they acknowledged they had no new leads to share publicly. She remained officially a missing person, not declared dead, not solved, just open, just waiting. The New Hampshire State Police have classified this case over the years as potentially a homicide, not definitively, but as the most likely explanation given the absence of any evidence pointing to a voluntary disappearance or an accidental death in the wilderness. In 2009, Associate Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin told reporters, "We don't know if Maura is a victim, but the state is treating it as a potential homicide." That statement, made 5 years after her disappearance, was a significant shift from the early language of the investigation, which had been more cautious and less direct. By 2014, on the 10-year anniversary of the disappearance, Strelzin confirmed publicly, "We haven't had any credible sightings of Maura since the night she disappeared." And Fred Murray, in a New York Daily News interview that year, confirmed what he had privately believed for a decade. His daughter was dead. She had been taken. And whoever took her had never been identified, never been charged, and for all anyone knew, had been living freely in the world for 10 years, and counting. In February 2024, 20 years to the month after Maura Murray drove into those mountains and vanished, till a new detail entered public discussion. Journalist James Renner, who had been investigating the case since the mid-2000s, reported that fingerprints found inside Maura's Saturn had been matched by investigators to a former West Point cadet named Stephen Baldwin. Baldwin himself confirmed this publicly. This development was significant because it placed someone previously outside the official narrative inside Maura's car. But it did not solve the case. It did not explain what happened that night. Investigators did not announce an arrest. No charges were filed. The match raised more questions than it answered, and the case remained officially open, officially unsolved, officially one of the great unanswered mysteries of modern American true crime. And then quietly, later that same year, Fred Murray, and the man who had spent 20 years walking those mountain roads calling his daughter's name, passed away. He died without ever finding her. There is a particular kind of grief that has no name. It is not the grief of loss, exactly, because loss implies you know what was taken. It is not the grief of acceptance, because acceptance requires knowing what you are accepting. It lives in the space between. The Murray family called it, in a quiet and devastating phrase, grief purgatory. That is the phrase trauma therapist Chow Nguyen used in speaking with A and E Crime, an investigation in 2025, when discussing the experience of families who never receive answers about a missing loved one. "You don't ever have closure," Nguyen said. "Your thoughts wander, and if you think about this going on for decades, the grief, the mystery, the anguish is profound." Maura's sister, Julie Murray, who has been one of the most visible and consistent advocates for the case over the years, put it plainly in her own words. "We have grappled with the fact that we will most likely never see Maura again, but I have never once thought that I needed to be okay with never having an answer." So what do we believe happened to Maura Murray? Here are the 4 most studied explanations, presented fairly, without judgment, because each one of them is grounded in something real. The first is foul play by an unknown individual. The theory supported by Fred Murray, by private investigator Lou Barry, and by most serious investigators who have reviewed the case. Someone on that road in those critical minutes took advantage of a vulnerable young woman in a broken-down car in the dark, and in the cold, on an isolated stretch of highway. The physical evidence, particularly the unidentified vehicle parked nose to nose with her Saturn before police arrived, supports this explanation more directly than any other. It does not require a connection to Maura's past. It requires only the terrible and very real truth that danger sometimes has no logic, no motive, and no face. It requires only the wrong road, the wrong night, and the wrong pair of headlights stopping at the wrong moment. The second theory is exposure, that Maura, possibly impaired by the alcohol she had consumed earlier, walked away from the crash and into the wilderness, became disoriented in the dark and the cold, and died from hypothermia somewhere in the terrain along Route 112. Hypothermia can impair judgment rapidly. It causes confusion and a poor decision-making, and in some documented cases, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where a person removes their clothing in the final stages despite the cold. The White Mountain terrain is unforgiving enough and dense enough that a body in the right conditions could theoretically remain undiscovered for decades. This explanation has never been disproven, and it remains possible, but it struggles to account for the unidentified vehicle, and it struggles to explain why search dogs found no trace of her moving into the forest, only along the road. The third theory, that Maura left voluntarily, staged the crash, and accepted a ride from a prearranged contact to begin a new life elsewhere, remains in circulation, but is rejected outright by her family and most investigators. And the fourth theory, the one that lives at the far edge of what most people are comfortable considering, is that someone Maura knew was involved, that the drive north was not entirely unplanned in the sense that someone else knew she was coming, that the rag in the tailpipe, the packed dorm room, the false email to her professors, the cash withdrawal, the destination research, that these were the actions not just of a woman running from her life, but of a woman running towards someone specific. That what happened on Route 112 was not random, that the crash was an accident, but what followed was not. This theory is the hardest to sit with, because it means that somewhere in the web of people who knew Maura Murray, who loved her or claimed to love her, who drove those roads or lived in those towns or had reason to know her movements, there is someone who knows exactly what happened and who has said nothing for 20 years and who walks free. This case is not just a mystery, it is a mirror. It reflects something about the specific vulnerability of young people who are struggling, carrying weight that nobody around them can see, making decisions in the dark that don't make sense from the outside, moving through the world in a kind of quiet crisis that looks, from the right angle, like an ordinary Tuesday. Maura Murray was not reckless. She was not irresponsible. She was a Dean's List nursing student who volunteered at a nursing home in high school because she liked talking to elderly people and making them laugh. She was a runner who trained in weather that would keep most people indoors. She was someone's little sister, someone's daughter, someone's girlfriend. And in the 4 days before she disappeared, she was someone standing at a crossroads, carrying the weight of her sister's pain, the weight of a legal mistake, the weight of a relationship under strain, and the weight of a future that felt, perhaps, like it was moving in a direction she couldn't control. And on the night of February 9th, 2004, that weight brought her to a 2-lane road in the White Mountains. A road her father had driven her along as a child. A road that cut through the kind of country she had always loved. And something happened there. Something we have not yet been able to prove. Something that a family has been asking about for 20 years without getting a straight answer. Something that the mountains know and the road knows, and whoever stopped their vehicle on that stretch of Route 112 between 7:33 and 7:46 in the evening knows. And something that Maura Murray, wherever she is, whatever happened to her, deserved to have answered a very long time ago. Justice for Maura Murray is not a phrase. It is not a hashtag. It is a debt. It is the specific and long overdue obligation of everyone who has the power to provide answers, and has not. Not yet. We began this story on a dark road in February. We began with a car in a snowbank and a neighbor's 911 call, and 4 minutes that should have been enough. We began with a young woman who was there and then wasn't. And here, at the end, we find ourselves in the same place, because that is the nature of unsolved cases. They don't resolve. They don't offer the satisfaction of a final chapter. They leave you standing on the same dark road, looking at the same empty space, asking the same question. Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire still stands. The sharp left-hand curve where Maura's Saturn came to rest is still there, unmarked, unchanged. The mountain forests are still dense and cold and quiet. And somewhere, in those trees, or in someone's memory, or in a file that hasn't been fully opened, or in the conscience of someone who was on that road that night, the answer to what happened to Maura Murray still exists. It has always existed. We just haven't found it yet. On February 9th, 2004, a young woman drove into these mountains. She was 21 years old. She was a runner. She was a nursing student. She was a daughter and a sister. She had a smile that took up half a photograph and dimples that people remembered years later, and a competitive fire that had carried her to nationals at 16 years old. She had a boyfriend who loved her and a father who drove to New Hampshire without sleeping when he heard she was missing and didn't stop looking until the day he died. She had a family who is still waiting. She had a life, and that life was cut short on a dark road in February, and whoever is responsible has never been held accountable. And Maura Murray, wherever she is still waiting to be found. Her case remains open. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit continues to seek tips. And if you know anything at all, about what happened on Route 112 on the night of February 9th, 2004, you can contact the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit, because 20 years is long enough, and some debts never expire. Now I want to hear from you. What do you believe happened to Maura Murray that night? Do you think someone on that road took her? Do you think she walked into those mountains and never came back? Do you think there is someone out there right now who knows the answer and has been living with that silence for 20 years? Drop your theory in the comments below and tell me why. Because the comment section on this video is where some of the most thoughtful, serious conversations about this case happen, and I read every single one. And for those of you who commented earlier with where you're watching from, thank you. This community stretches across every time zone and every continent. Oh, and the fact that a 21-year-old nursing student from Hanson, Massachusetts matters to people in every corner of the world 20 years later says something important about why stories like this need to be told. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell, and I will see you in the next one. Because the next story we're covering involves a disappearance, a family's silence, and an answer that was hiding in plain sight the entire time. You are not going to want to miss it.